Vibrant music teaching.
Proven and practical
Tips, strategies,
and ideas
for music teachers.
Welcome to episode 10 of the Vibrant Music Teaching Podcast. I'm Nicola Canton, and today I want to help you teach your newbies how to navigate the keyboard quickly and easily. In this episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the subject of keyboard or piano geography. In other words, how to find your way around the piano. Now, you may have noticed that this episode is pretty much just applicable to piano teachers. For the most part, I try to keep this podcast fairly relevant for all music teachers because I think we can all learn a lot from each other. And that's actually why I have the Vibrant Music Studio Teachers Facebook group. It's because I believe that we can learn from each other's experiences no matter which instrument we're teaching or where in the world we're teaching, and that most things are actually relevant to all instrumental and vocal teachers. This one, however, is a specific topic that is only relevant to piano teachers because, as I say, we're talking about piano geography. Now, the reason I wanted to record this podcast episode is because this is something that I used to neglect in my teaching a lot. And I've mentioned that previously, and it's something that I see other teachers neglecting too. You see, it can be tempting not to really teach this at all, and I get that. It seems like it's just logical, okay? It's the first 7 letters of the alphabet, and that's fairly straightforward. And for an adult student, yes, they will find their own way around the piano using just that information. You just have to tell them and they're off on their way. It's not a big deal for them. But the more I started teaching preschoolers, the more I had to realize that this needed to be taught to them. Even the groups of black keys weren't immediately apparent to them, and I needed to put some effort into genuinely teaching this stuff. And as I started to teach this to preschoolers, I realized that it was really beneficial for everyone to be taught this stuff a little bit more explicitly, and especially everyone under the age of, say, 10. Where before I was just giving them the information or they were absorbing it as we went through, then I started teaching this to all of my students in a much more in-depth way. And I found a huge benefit in this. And now when I get transfer students in, I notice a massive difference in how quickly they can find the correct key and navigate the piano, which is obviously super important if you're going to be playing things, sight reading things, and just generally getting through lessons. So I've come to view this as a core concept that I want to teach all my students. But I have special strategies that I use to slow it down in those beginning years with preschoolers and younger students especially. Now, I'll just go through my approach and how I sequence things because everyone's a little bit different here. I start obviously with the preschoolers, I start with the groups of black keys, the 2 and 3 black key groups. And this really needs different levels of teaching depending on the student. Some get it straight away, even at 3 years old, and some at 6 years old totally don't get it and need a lot of going over of this, and that's completely fine. If they need that extra reinforcement to see those patterns, it's better to do that now than a long way down the track when you realize actually the only note they can find is middle C, and it's because they're relating it to the writing on the piano instead of actually navigating using the black keys. So we start with the groups of black keys, and I introduce the D key. The first white key I introduce is the key D because it's the easiest to find. There's no way to confuse left and right, and there's no way to confuse which one it is in the middle because it is exactly in the middle of the 2 black keys. If all this sounds obvious to you, then I'm sorry for talking you through each step, but this wasn't immediately apparent to me, and I didn't pick this out as something I should teach first and foremost and ignore all the other white keys for quite a time. But that's what I do now. So D comes first, and until I am absolutely positive that they know where D is and could find it with their eyes closed, then I don't move on to anything else. The next stage for me is to introduce C and E, either side of D, so that they have a group C, D, E, and they practice finding them in a pattern going up and going down. Then we move to the 3 black keys and I introduce F first. And again, until I'm absolutely positive that they know F and can find it no matter what, I won't introduce the group. But when I do, I'll introduce a full group together, F, G, A, B. So they're starting in F and then we'll start doing it backwards as well, B, A, G, F. This seems like a lot of stages and I get that. But you could understand how this could happen with a teenage student all in the first lesson, right? You're just checking that they can find D, they understand what you're saying, that they can find then the groups and do them backwards, and it's a little bit of a game and you're over with it. But if they need more reinforcement, you get to see which stage you need to put that reinforcement in as you go through. So when they do need more reinforcement, I'll start with doing their technique exercises and songs from that particular key. So this could be, for example, at the beginning of Piano Safari where they have the line pause, those all go from the Ds. So that's a great way to practice that key when I'm working on that one. When we've moved on to F, we'll practice line pause into the F or into the E or into the C. So we're moving through them and it's just that extra reinforcement. It provides an extra layer where we can work on that particular key that we're working on that day or that group. Likewise with their songs, if they're just working on a finger number pattern and we're going to transpose it, then I'll challenge them to find a certain key with a certain finger. So let's put finger 2 on G and we'll give this song a go there. If you're working on something like Mary Had a Little Lamb or something like that, where you're going to transpose it with them, this is a great activity to do and just add that extra little step that gives them some more practice finding keys and navigating the keyboard correctly. After D has been introduced and I've been working on groups of keys, that's where my games come in. Now, I'll start off before this even working with games when we're talking about the groups of black keys. And for those, especially with preschoolers, under 6s, let's say, I'll be using the keyboard builder, which is on my blog, and Dogs and Gates, which you'll also find there. So those are activities to work on the groups of black keys. And like I say, if a student gets that straight away, I'm not going to labor the point. I'm not going to go over and over it. But if they don't get it, it is so valuable to go over it lots of times and they aren't bothered by it if it's framed as a game like this. So that's the way I work on the groups of 2 and 3 black keys. Then I'll start to introduce games. The first one I do is very simple. I like to call it This Little Hedgehog. Now I call it This Little Hedgehog because I use my little Iwako hedgehog erasers that I have, which are those little Japanese puzzle erasers. Doesn't have to be hedgehogs, okay? It could be anything. It could be any animal you have in tiny form or just rubbers and, this little red rubber wants to sit here or this little post-it. It doesn't really matter. But it is fun to have an animal and it makes it that much more interactive and playful for your students. And I'll ask them to put the hedgehog somewhere. This is just to test their knowledge. So if they're working just on C, D, and E, I would ask them, okay, this little hedgehog wants to go on a low C. This little hedgehog wants to go on a high E, etc., right? And they're just demonstrating to you in that way that they can find, first of all, high and low keys. That's another thing that they need to navigate at the piano, but also that they can find a particular note. And through that, you'll see whether they have to go through the pattern, whether they have to figure it out in some way or reference some other point or look at a poster that's up in your studio, or whether they just jump straight to it. Over time, they should be able to immediately identify the keys, but it does take time for some students. So if they're working on C, D, E, we would do it with that, F, G, A, B with that, or I would have them do it with the whole group once they're ready for that as well. After this little hedgehog, one of the other games I like to do is called Key Clamber. This is a printable dice, which you can find in VMT if you're a member. But if you aren't a member, you could use Decide Now app or make your own dice. I like to have them separate. So for Key Clamber, they're 2 separate dice. And one is just C, Ds, and Es. And one is F, G, A, B. And I prefer to put 2 A's or 2 A's or 2 G's because those are the ones most easily confused. So that's just a little trick for you if you're making your own. Obviously, there's 6 sides on a die, so you have to double up on 2 of those, and I'll double up A and G because they're the middle ones, and you may have noticed that students get them confused because they're in the middle of the 3 black keys. It's not as easy to instantly find those. So I have 2 sets of dice, and we'll either use C, D, E or F, G, A, B, or we'll do the full version, which I do C, D, E on the way up and F, G, A, B on the way down. So we're sitting little hedgehogs again or something else on the piano or on the paper keyboard that I have and working our way up. So we just roll the die one by one and move to the next nearest one of that. So you would move up to the first C or up to the next D, etc. as you roll. And the winner is the first to reach the C at the top or the first to reach the A at the bottom, depending on which version you're doing. Another game I love to do is musical meander, and in fact musical meander and musical alphabet memory I'll put in the same camp here, because with those ones you're looking at the keys in a picture, right? It's a symbol of the piano keys. So it's just the group of 2 or group of 3 and you need to identify. This helps again for students to split up the 2 groups so that they have that as a reference point, because otherwise they'll tend to go back to working from C all the way up, or the worst case scenario is that they decide to only go from A at the bottom of the piano and remember that as a reference point. And that's just not a quick way to find your way around. So making sure that they understand those 2 groups and think about them in that way has been very useful for me. And those games, like I say, show pictures of the keys in the group of 2 or group of 3. And then they need to identify the key name in order to match up pairs or musical meander they're moving forward on a game board. I also have songs that I use that they sing along while they play. Now, songs is maybe a strong word for what these are. All I'm getting them to do is play C, D, E on the way up and then E, D, C on the way down. And likewise F, G, A, B on the way up and B, A, G, F on the way down. So they have to play those groups one by one, just with finger 2 or something, and also say them. And I emphasize that because it doesn't count if they don't say them as they go. And I always make them restart if they don't say them. So that's just to reinforce the pattern, getting them saying it and practicing jumping between the groups and finding them really quickly as well. Now, as you might imagine, this takes quite a few weeks with some students to get through all these activities and each stage working from D to C, D, E to F, G, A, B. But it doesn't end when we get through all of those levels. The most important part, and the lesson I've learned the hard way over and over again, especially with young students, is that you need to revisit these things time and time again going forward, even if it seems like they get it right now. So don't leave it 2 years until you ever play these games again, is what I'm saying. Have a little check-in every month or so, even after they seem to get all the keys, because it won't always be coming up and they can find their own little tricks and ways of navigating where it's disguised when they're reading music, but suddenly it comes back to bite you. So have these little games. They can really only take a minute or 2, some of them, to play with your student. Going forward, just every so often, have it a reminder for yourself to check in with these things, at least for the first year, once a month or so. Having said that, it may take the full year for them to get through this whole process, and that's okay too. It'll totally depend on the student and their age, how long it takes them to get through this. As an average guideline with a preschooler, normally they'd have all their keys, they'd have gotten through FGAB and be working with the full set and identifying them pretty quickly after the first semester with me. But it does take up to the first semester for young students to get this, so be patient, keep reviewing stuff, and make sure you notice when it's just your expectations that are getting in the way, because often preschoolers, young students, older students even, have no idea that they're going slowly unless you point it out to them or seem frustrated or give up on it. So just make sure to check your own expectations of progress as you work through this stuff. And when it comes to transfer students and adults, you're probably not going to want to start at the beginning, although you might. And you might still want to do some of these games. I've actually talked to teachers who have done things like Dogs and Gates and the Keyboard Builder with adult students. And if you introduce it in the right way and acknowledge that maybe it feels a little bit silly, but that you know it's useful, you might be surprised how well they react to it and how they get into the swing of it and have some fun with it too. I'd love to hear how you get on with these tips for teaching keyboard geography. If you already do something similar to this, if maybe you picked up something new this time, let me know about it. I'd love to hear your experiences in the Vibrant Music Studio Teachers Group on Facebook. If you're interested in how I teach the circle of fifths and chords and scales and all that kind of stuff to my students, then you should definitely register for my upcoming webinar. It's on Friday the 5th of October, so it's coming up soon, and you can register at vibrantmusicteaching.com/COF for Circle of Fifths. So vibrantmusicteaching.com/COF, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Vibrant Music Teaching podcast. Bye for now. Vibrant Music Teaching members can now find the Transfer Student Transition special video inside the library, as well as all the other courses and the full library of games and activities for their students. If you're not a member yet, you might want to check it out. Go to vmt.ninja to join us today.